Chapter 9. The pig, the bullocks, the sheep, the pony, and the nanny-goat. At that moment, George's mother came back from shopping in the village. She drove her car into the yard and got out. She was carrying a bottle of milk in one hand and a bag of groceries in the other. The first thing she saw was the gigantic brown hen towering over little George. She dropped the bottle of milk. Then Grandma started shouting at her from the rooftop. But when she looked up and saw Grandma's head sticking out of the roof, she dropped the groceries. "How about it then, eh, Mary?" Grandma shouted. "I'll bet you've never seen a hen as big as that. That's George's giant hen, that is." But stammered George's mother. "It's George's marvellous medicine!" Grandma shouted. "We've both had it, the hen and I." "But how did you get up on the roof?" cried George's mother. "I didn't," cracked the old woman. "My feet are still standing on the floor in the living room." This was just too much for George's mother to understand. She just goggled and gaped. She looked as though she was going to faint. A second later, George's father appeared. His name was Mr. Killiecrankie. Mr. Cranky was a small man with bandy legs and a huge head. He was a kind father to George, but he wasn't an easy person to live with because even the smallest things got him all worked up and excited. The hen standing in the yard certainly was not a small thing, and when Mr. Cranky saw it, he started jumping about as if something was burning his feet. "Great heavens!" he cried, waving his arms. "What is this? What has happened? Where did it come from? It's a giant hen! Who did it?" "I did it," George said. "Look at me!" Grandma shouted from the rooftop. "Never mind the hen, look at me!" Mr. Cranky looked up and saw Grandma. "Shut up, Grandma," he said. It didn't seem to surprise him that the old girl was sticking up through the roof. It was the hen that had excited him. He'd never seen anything like it, but then who had? "It's fantastic," said Mr. Cranky, dancing round and round. It's colossal. It's gigantic. It's tremendous. It's a miracle. How did you do it, George?" George started to tell his father all about his magic medicine. And while he was doing this, the big brown hen sat down in the middle of the yard and went, "Cluck, cluck, 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 cluck." Everyone stared at it. "Cluck, cluck, 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 cluck." When it stood up again, there was a brown egg lying there. The egg was the size of a football. "That would make scrambled eggs for 20 people, Mr. Cranky said. "George," Mr. Cranky shouted, "how much of this medicine have you got?" "Lots," said George. "There's a great big saucepan full of it in the kitchen, and this bottle's almost full." "Come with me," Mr. Cranky yelled, grabbing George by the arm. "Bring the medicine. For years and years I've been trying to breed bigger pigs and bigger animals, bigger bulls for beef, bigger pigs for pork, bigger sheep for mutton." They went to the pigsty first. George gave a spoonful of medicine to the pig. The pig blew smoke from its nose and jumped about all over the place. And then it grew and grew, and in the end it looked like this. They went to the herd of a fine black bullocks that Mr. Cranky was trying to fatten for the market. George gave each one of them some of the medicine, and this is what happened. Then came the sheep. He gave some to his grey pony, Jack Frost. And then, finally, just for fun, he gave some to Alma the nanny-goat. I think we've got time for one more chapter. It's a very short one. It's chapter 10, A Crane for Grandma. Can you see a chicken's arrived in the background as well? Somewhere over there. Not a big fat one yet, but we'll feed it later. Grandma, from high up on the rooftop, couldn't see everything that was going on. So could see everything that was going on, and she didn't like what she saw. She wanted to be the centre of attention, and nobody was taking the slightest notice of her. George and Mr. Cranky were just running around and getting excited about the enormous animals. Mrs. Cranky had gone to do the washing up in the kitchen, and Grandma was just left all alone on the rooftop. "Hey, you!" she yelled. "George, get me a cup of tea this minute! You idle little beast!" "Don't listen to the old goat," said Mr. Cranky. "She's stuck where she is, and it's a good thing too. But we can't leave her up there, Dad, can we? What if it rains?" "George!" Grandma yelled. "Oh, you horrible little boy! You disgusting little worm! Fetch me a cup of tea at once and a slice of currant cake." "We'll have to get her out, Dad," George said. "She won't give us any peace if we don't." Mr. Cranky came outside. Mrs. Cranky came outside, and she agreed with George. "She's my own mother," she said. "She's a pain in the neck," Mr. Cranky said. "I don't care," Mrs. Cranky said. "I'm not leaving my mother sticking up on the roof for the rest of her life." So, in the end, Mr. Cranky telephoned the crane company and asked them to send their biggest crane over to the house at once. The crane arrived an hour later. It was on wheels, and there were 2 men inside it. The crane men climbed up onto the roof and put ropes under Grandma's arms. Then she was lifted up right through the roof. In a way, the medicine had done Grandma some good. It hadn't made her any less grumpy or bad-tempered, but it seems to have cured all her aches and pains, and she was suddenly as frisky as a ferret. As soon as the crane was lowered to the ground, she ran over to George's huge pony, Jack Frost, and jumped onto his back. The ancient old hag, who was now as tall as a house, then galloped about the farm on a gigantic pony, jumping over trees and sheds and shouting, "Out of my way! Clear the decks! Stand back, you miserable midgets, or I'll trample you to death!" and all other silly things like that. But because Grandma was now much too tall to get back into the house, she had to sleep that night in the hay barn with all the mice and all the rats.